Well, first off, update, talked to Curtis a few times this week. I do that routinely. And it's, first off, it's always interesting conversations, but he's just not feeling well tonight, not been doing well this week, but he's listening, I know. But anyway, we miss him. I miss him considerably. The one thing I'll tell you about this course, first off, it's hard to quote scriptures about a period that no scripture was written. So it is a history lesson, and you noted that, and that's what this is. It's not secular history. It's history that applies to our everyday lives. It applies to Christianity. It applies to our understanding. This is getting to a point where it's past the need for milk. This is even past the need for meat. It's an understanding of how we got to this point, how the church as a whole got to a point of maturity. And so I will say that it's a history lesson, but it is an important history lesson. And I go back to what we talked about at the beginning of this course, that just because there's no scriptures written during this period, there certainly are scriptures written about this period. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about. Tonight, we're going to talk about basically a subject that's easy to find information on, much easier than any of these others. But the Maccabees, the Maccabean revolt, they call it. And just to tell you how we get to this point, of course, we talked about the Babylonians and Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And you've got in your book of maps, there's also a picture of the dream, of the vision that he saw in his dream, that Daniel told him what he saw and told what it meant. And that was the beginning of it. They took a bunch of the Jewish people when they conquered Jerusalem. They took the young men, took Daniel, took the three youths that were in the fiery furnace, and a bunch of others, and took them to Babylon. And then eventually, this was a time where everybody was fighting everybody. We were talking earlier about looking at the maps. You'd have to redraw the maps almost by the day. It's always back and forth, back and forth. One of them conquered the other one, they'd come back. That's just the way it was. The Persians eventually conquered Babylon, and some of the Jews were then allowed to return to Jerusalem, and they began to rebuild the temple. Some of the Jews chose to stay in Babylon. We talked about the diaspora, I guess, the last time, and that was, I won't say that was the beginning, but that was a beginning of a recording of a dispersion of the Jews to different parts of the world. And then when they rebuilt the temple, of course, they also got a renewed interest and devotion to God's law. And that was something that is important to us. It was a rebirth of what they had been promised. They from there, we talked about the Greeks, and started in Macedonia, but the Greeks, with the philosophy and the arts and the culture and all that, they took over country, an empire that included Jerusalem again. And that was when Alexander the Great, at the end, he took Egypt, and remember, he went into India and started dressing differently. He took on the culture of wherever it was he conquered, you know. And he was he died at 32. All the things, you can read tons of things about Alexander the Great. He died at 32. You know, I tease my kids about that. I didn't even get paid till I was 32. And so it's what he accomplished in that short period of time. Then when he died, a mysterious death, and that was one of the things that distracted me week before last, whenever it was, preparing for the class. The stories of his death are just terrific. I mean, you can't even imagine how that could happen, even in those days. You know, they don't know what he died from, what he said. What I do know is that 5 generals fought each other for about 5 years trying to establish who was going to be his successor. I think they misunderstood when he died. He said that his successor was going to be whoever's the strongest. You know, whoever is not a definitive noun. It's whoever's the strongest. And so they took that to mean them, not his sons. So they, and after that, these 5 years, that's part of what we talked about last year, seems like a year, last week, Ptolemy and the Seleucids. And Ptolemy took Egypt, and the Seleucids took, they called it Asia, but Syria basically, Syria and Asia Minor. And that brings you to what caused the Maccabees to respond. They, Antiochus the Fourth, called it Epiphanes, which is allegedly means chosen of God, but it also means the brilliant one. I think he chose that name himself, would be my guess. That's what I can find out. And that's what he was fighting the wars, and he managed to take over Syria and Asia Minor. It included Jerusalem, and it was interesting on Jerusalem during this time. That was a place that really it went back and forth between the followers of Ptolemy and between the Seleucids. They would fight a battle for a few years, take over, and then somebody else would take over. Finally, Antiochus the Fourth, I think, was who we talked about at the end last week. He started with, he took over part of Egypt. He went into Egypt. But he also, while he was gone, word came back that he had died. And up until this time, all of them had really not persecuted the Jews. They had basically allowed them to have the religious freedom, to do what were their responsibilities, to have their feast and their practices of circumcision. And when he came back, after they had reported that he had died, well, he had not died. And when he came back, they had already, they being the Jews, had already expelled who he had put in as their priest, their high priest. And it's interesting reading that it seems that the high priest at that point in time, a couple things. One of them, he wasn't even from the tribe of Levi, he was the tribe of Benjamin. And the ones that were always ended up being the high priest were the ones who gave the biggest bribe. some things don't change, but that they took the bribe from one, took the bribe from the next one, took the bribe from the next one. This is what leads into the Maccabean revolt. After he had come back, after Antiochus came back, there was ongoing fights since they had already ran off the high priest. There was a fight, but it was a civil war more than it was a fight with external people. There was a civil war between different sects of the Jews. Those that were strict adherents to the Torah, and Hasidic. I think we talked about the Hasidic Jews a little bit last week, and that's the ones that were strict followers of the law, and the Torah being specific, that particular part of the Hebrew scriptures. And the others were Hellenistic Jews. They had adapted or adopted a lot of the writings outside of the Torah and had adopted the culture of the Hellenists and some of the philosophies and perhaps some of the religion. And that's when he came back, there was a war going on between them, and I'll come back to that in a little bit. But when Antiochus came back, at a point they had started killing each other. That's the one thing I have noticed in all of these wars. There were no rules of battle at that point in time. I mean, you hear it nowadays, that's a war crime. There was no such thing back then. I mean, they killed friends, they killed their neighbors, they killed their brother multiple times. One of the people we're going to talk about in a little bit is the beginning of the Maccabees. He was killed. No, he died, and then one of his last son was killed by his son-in-law, who was also named Ptolemy. That must have been a common name back then. But anyway, he was killed, and two of his sons. The whole bunch of Maccabees were wiped out in one fell swoop at the end. So Antiochus, anyway, he misinterpreted that fight between them as a general revolt. The fight between the sects of the Jews was interpreted as a revolt against him and against him personally and against the Seleucids. And his response was to punish Jews. And he just forbade everything that was Jewish. The Jewish heritage, the Jewish religion could not have Hebrew scriptures, could not have observed the feasts that they were required to observe, no more circumcision. They were against all of it. No dietary restrictions, what we call kosher now, but no kosher laws could be followed. And then he followed it with mandatory following of the Greek religion with all the multiple gods. They required sacrifice. No more could you do sacrifice according to the Jewish law, but a sacrifice to the Greek gods. And it's mandatory, and you had to do it in every single place. Everybody had a temple, everybody had a priest that was that, and that's when the revolt started. And it started as a simmering fight, I would say. But the the noted difference, the noted beginning of the Maccabean revolt was there was a priest in a little small town that refused to do it. He stood his ground. It was in the town of Modi'in. Again, this is one of those things where, it's like my Spanish and my English, it all has a Texas drawl, so I apologize for that. But that's the way I think it's pronounced, Modi'in. And they came into the town with an officer of the Seleucids, of the army, to enforce that, to make them obey the Greek laws, have their town statue, and to do sacrifices. And Mattathias was the priest there, old priest. And he said no, absolutely refused. And they were going to make him to do it. And he wouldn't do it, so they asked for other people. Mattathias killed the officer, killed a Jew who volunteered to do it for money, but volunteered to do it. And then at that point, he also, any other Jew who they felt like was Hellenistic, was not Jewish enough, not following the Jewish laws as closely as they could. He had 5 sons. Mattathias had 5 sons. And he and his 5 sons, and perhaps family, fled to the Judea wilderness up in the hills. In this part of the world, they'd be mountains, but they're hills. And they ran to the mountains, not to get away, and they asked everybody else in the town, people who were devout, who were devoted to following the rules, following the law, following the Torah. He invited them to join them in the wilderness. And I'm going to throw in little things that kind of picked up along the way that may not make any difference, but they were interesting, I thought. One of the things that they had gone through by being strict about that, by following the scriptures, there's no Hebrew scripture that prohibits fighting on the Sabbath, fighting in a war on the Sabbath. But by this time, it was at least a custom and a belief that you shouldn't fight on the Sabbath. They felt like that would desecrate the Sabbath. And so they would refuse to fight to the point of death, that they would not fight even in the face of death. And one time after, and the Ptolemies and the Seleucids both would take advantage of that. Like I said, they were going back and forth on who was in charge of Jerusalem anyway, but they would take advantage of that, and they would advance. They would attack on the Sabbath. They'd figured it out already that they weren't paying attention to that. And finally, Mattathias stood up after one such attack, and he said, "Let us fight against anyone who comes to attack us on the Sabbath day. Let us not die as our kindred died in their hiding places." And I think that gave them the advantage of being able to fight back when somebody was attacking you, even if it happened to be Saturday. His son, I think anyway, he had 5 sons, and I think it was the 3rd son, but anyway, his name was Judah or Judas. Every one of them now have a Greek name and a Hebrew name. So if I go back and forth on Judah and Judas, it's the same person or a different generation. Anyway, they called him Judah Maccabeus. Okay, and that was who Mattathias chose to be the military leader from his sons. And that Maccabeus means the hammer. And that was not a family name necessarily, but a title or a description. And all of his followers eventually, the people that fought with him, eventually became known as the Maccabees. That's where that came from. It's not like McKinney. That's son of Kinney. Maccabees, I don't think is son of bees. That's before the Irish were involved. Judah Maccabeus, very skilled in guerrilla warfare, which was important if you're going to be a rebel, if you're going to rebel against a much larger force, a much better armed force, frankly, a much better trained force. But they became very good in guerrilla warfare. They also figured out that it would work better in small towns, outlying areas, far away from or not far away, but away from the population centers, the big town, the big cities. Because for one thing, it would be harder for the Seleucids to leave where they were, Seleucids at the time, to leave where they were and get to the small town to suppress the rebellion. And these rebellions, it's not like they practiced, their guerrilla warfare was such that it was hit and run. And they killed everybody. They would kill them if they were if they wouldn't convert, or swear to follow the rules strictly. And they started the revolution doing that out on the small parts. At first, now again, the war it was a civil war. It wasn't attacking the Seleucids. It wasn't attacking the ones that you would think that it would be. Eventually, they would get to the Seleucid army, but they were quoted as being swift and fierce, which means they got there quick and they did a lot of damage while they were there, and they did as much as they could do. Hit and run tactics, and they fought and killed a bunch of their, I won't say their fellow Jews, but other Jews, the Hellenistic Jews. And they lost some of their own. You hear about the wars in the Old Testament. There were so many people killed in each of them. And that's the tactics they knew. So they, part of what they did is interesting that basically it was in response to what Antigonus IV had done in making them follow the Greeks. Areas that they conquered, including the areas with the Hellenized Jews, they forced them to follow closely the Torah, including, forced circumcision on the areas that they conquered. The boys they were forcibly circumcised. They destroyed the altars of the pagan altars and the pagan statues that they had erected in the town, like statues of Zeus and all that. Well, they fought a number of fights during that. And one of the things that they did is, I'll come to the Battle of Emmaus. I can't even say it. Emmaus. It's the most famous battle, 165 BC. And Maccabees used their strategy and divine favor. And that comes from that's a quote from the book, I guess the first book of Maccabees. And I'm talking about the book of Maccabees. The first we talked about, it's not part of the canon that we use. It's very interesting about let me find my notes, and there was a lot written about why book of Maccabees not in the canon, it's not in our Bible. First off, it was written after the fact. It was not written during the time, but I guess the first Maccabee seems to have been written by someone that was an eyewitness, and the second one, not so much. But both of them are good histories. There's ways to know things that are not in the Bible. And there's ways to know things about religion that are not in the Bible. For instance, this course. But they look back, the book of Maccabee, books of Maccabee, they were in the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. They weren't in the Hebrew Bible. But the Greeks, the Hellenistic Jews that translated this, took the Maccabees and had it in their Bible, in their scriptures. And they just had it included when they translated it. Well, that translation was the Septuagint. Again, that was the Old Testament that was used by the Hellenistic Jews, by the first century church. That it was a translation from Hebrew into Greek, and that Maccabees was in that. Okay. The part that makes that interesting is that the Catholic Church, the Orthodox Church, has their Bible, and it is a part of the Septuagint. It came from the Septuagint, and that those books, Maccabees, were in their canon also. That was part of their scriptures. Okay, in all the writings I see, they give a whole lot of credit to Martin Luther, but I'm not sure that that's where it goes. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's not where the credit should go. We have a scripture that says all scripture comes from God and is approved by God, and that. But the Martin Luther and others said that this couldn't be part of the canon. A number of reasons they disagreed. Like I say, First Timothy 3 and 16, or I'm sorry, can't even read my 2 Timothy 3 and 16, and it says that all scriptures are approved by God. This was not in the Hebrew Bible. This was not a translation from the Hebrew. Maccabees was not in the Hebrew Bible. That's one of the reasons they gave. Another reason is there's just doctrinal differences. For instance, in Maccabees has a prayer for the dead, and that is direct opposition to some of the teachings in the Hebrew Bible. And in the New Testament. So there was that fight. That's a latter day. That's just a sidelight. But that Maccabees is still a good historical document. And it's kind of like some of the other stories I've had. And most of them are true, but not all of them. So you have to take it. Again, understanding that it's a good history. Josephus, we talk about Josephus a lot of times when we talk about the Old Testament. I mean, he's a Jewish historian, but he wrote 2 centuries after all this. So again, it's not inspired, but it's, and in fact, in Maccabees, at the end of, again, 1 or 2, I have to think, I think it's at the end of 1. It's the Maccabee itself says, if this is good, or if this is bad, you know, I'm sorry, but if it's good, if it's good, I'm glad. If it's bad, it's the best that man can do. Well, that doesn't sound like an inspired statement. It doesn't sound like a statement of somebody who wrote inspired words. So even the author of Maccabees said it was not inspired, that it was a man's work. But it's a good man's work. I would remember me showing you my notes last time? Lou Ann read my handwriting this time. And I can almost read it, so. The Battle of Emmaus was the most famous battle, 165 BC, and he used a strategy, again, attacking small towns, hit and run, doing it at night, and the best part is the book of Maccabees says that he used it to defeat a larger, superior Seleucid force under General Gorgias. That was the Seleucid general, because of divine favor, which goes back and gets very close to what the Jews teach in the first place, right? That's what the strict adherents say. His tactics on taking back Jerusalem at this battle was that he first off he did nighttime raid, and he shrunk the troops, and he went to this is what scripture I am going to read in Deuteronomy 20. One through 9. Let me get to it. Used to I could just turn a page. Now I got to operate a machine. This is not artificial intelligence. This is actual ignorance, and so. Come on, McKinney. When thou goest out to battle against thine enemies and seest horses and chariots and a people more than thou, be not afraid of them. For the Lord thy God is with thee, which brought thee up out of the land of Egypt. And it shall be, when ye are come nigh unto the battle, that the priest shall approach and speak unto the people, and shall say to them, Hear, O Israel, ye approach this day unto battle against your enemies. Let not your hearts faint. Fear not, and do not tremble, neither be ye terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is he that goeth with you to fight for you against your enemies to save you. And the officers shall speak unto the people, saying, What man is there that hath built a new house, and hath not dedicated it? Let him go and return to his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man dedicate it. And what man is he that hath planted a vineyard, and hath not yet eaten of it? Let him also go and return unto his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man eat of it. And what man is there that hath betrothed a wife, and hath not taken her? Let him go and return unto his house, lest he die in the battle, and another man take her. And the officers shall speak further unto the people, and they shall say, What man is there that is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return unto his house, lest his brethren's heart faint as well as his heart. And it shall be, when the officers have made an end of speaking unto the people, that they shall make captains of the armies to lead the people. That basically is what they did from the in the Old Testament. That was their instruction. That was instructions to the Jews when they were taking Canaan. So he used that as a rallying cry for the people who were preparing to take Jerusalem back. He also did something that you recognize from other scriptures and from other historical battles. He tried to make it look, first off, he started with the troops of about 6,000, but about 3,000 were who went to the war. Okay, he sent all the people home that we just talked about should go home, including the faint-hearted. They didn't want to fight with somebody who wasn't ready to fight. But he spread out the troops, started fires, their watch fires, I guess, all the way around the area to make it look like they had more people. And besides that, he wanted the Gorgias and the Syrian troops, he wanted them to know their location. And the spies had located it and gone back and told them where it was. So Gorgian, the Syrian general, was going to attack, and he planned a nighttime attack. And Judith Maccabees took a different route. They knew the way to get from the Syrians knew how to get from their camp to the rebels' camp. They took a different way, and they got to each other's camp at about the same time. But the Syrians thought that the rebels had left. So they started breaking up into go search different places. They broke up. This is the divide and conquer routine. And in the meantime, the rebels took control of the citadel, of where they were, of their camp. And they got silver and gold weapons, evidently, that are more sophisticated than what they had. And the reason I say it, apparently, because later on in their fights, they had weapons that they did not have before that fight. So they fled and scattered and made them easier to catch and kill. And that was their philosophy of war. Anyway, they divided and conquered. And they eventually captured the temple, started the restoration of the temple, and they restored it the best they could. They ground the Zeus statue, ground it into dust. They reinstituted all the Jewish worship, cleansed it. There was the miracle of the oil. To light a menorah, to light their candles. It wasn't candles at the time, it was lamps, and they used olive oil. They found one sealed bottle or can or jar or whatever of olive oil, which would burn the menorah for a day, and it burned for 8 days. And that's, they call that the miracle of the oil, which is why now, or even after that, they started about 2 years after this episode, but the menorah has 8 lamps. Nowadays it's 8 candles, and that's in celebration of rededication of the temple, but also in recognition of the miracle of the oil. again, giving God credit for restoring that. And for saving a remnant. That's the part that I think is relative to us, is that there was a remnant saved. Always. Every time there was destruction, there was a remnant. And basically that's what we are, is a remnant. No matter whatever perversions there are to the scriptures or to religion, there's always, God has always provided a faithful remnant. And I trust that we're part of that. That's Hanukkah, by the way, the Festival of Lights. And I think we spoke last week about that Jesus attended in John 10, 22 and 24. Or through 24, there's a list of, Jesus was at the Festival of Lights. So again, that's one of those things that's related to that period. They didn't write the scripture during that time, but they wrote scripture about that time. And Jesus observed it. I mean, even if that was a secular recognition, that's what they did. When Antiochus IV died, the Seleucid army was called to return again to Syria. And there's Lysias, it says the commander of the Seleucid army. He was they called him a regent. I've dealt with regents before, so I don't know exactly what they were talking about. But anyway, he was the head of that part. He granted religious freedom to the Jews, giving the Maccabeans the right to run Judea, at least semi-autonomously, if not complete. They could be autonomous as long as they paid tribute, taxes, back to the Seleucid Empire. That began the Hasmonean dynasty. And Antiochus IV's suppression of Jewish religious practice is just one example in a long ongoing history of anti-Semitism in the world. Quickly, this again is a sidelight, but I can't help. You know, we now talk about anti-Semitic as specifically hostile to Jews. That's what it means now. Semitic people are descendants of Shem, S-H-E-M, Noah's son. That's the descendants of Semitic. That's Arabs, Hebrews, Syrians, Ethiopians. It's primarily a classification of language. Semitic race is inaccurate. There is no such thing. Semitism, Semitic, is now cultural, not biological. That's just one example of again, the Maccabean revolt's just one example of God's preserving the remnants. In case, I've got good questions, but we'll just ask those some other day. But the Maccabean revolt reinstated Jewish religious practice, and it left a hunger for a Messiah. Even though they didn't, just like the apostles, they didn't necessarily understand what that Messiah was going to be. They were looking for a military leader.